Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Cusick. I'm the lead pastor of Journey of Faith. And if this is your first time joining us online, we're so glad that you're with us. And this is actually a great time to be joining us because it's the start of the Christmas season. Before I get into the message for today, let me just share with you a few words about our big Christmas outreach this year. Every year, we as a church do something for the community and in the community. We've done different things over the years, like Journey to Bethlehem. We have our Christmas Journey production. And this year, it's a little bit different. It's going to be super personal. It's our Christmas cheer boxes. As a church, no matter what changes happen in our culture, we're committed to spreading the true message of the season, and that God has come into the world to display his love in the person of Jesus. So we've created these Christmas cheer boxes for you to hand out to your unchurched friends and family and neighbors and coworkers. It's a simple gift that spreads Christmas cheer. Many of us already give gifts, but this is about more than what's in the box. It's about the connection that you're forming with the person you give it to. And it's a way to say, I care about you, and I want to share with you what Christmas is all about. So you can find out more and pre-order your boxes today. I want to challenge you to get at least 2 of these boxes. I know some of you are going to be getting a lot more because you're really reaching out to people in your neighborhood. So you can order them online, and then you can pick them up at our drive-through December 5th and 6th at our Manhattan Beach campus or at our new Torrance campus location. And I'm going to be going back and forth between the 2 campuses to kind of cheer you on as you're picking up boxes to go give other people cheer. So thanks for doing that. Today, we're starting our 4-week series of messages called Christmas for Everyone. When it comes to our culture, Christmas is really celebrated by everyone with things like lights and gift giving. And fortunately, this season has a way of pulling people together and aiming us toward the things that we all have in common, like hope and generosity. And I think we need a lot more of that right now. But sometimes as Christians, we kind of say that the real Christmas is ours. Christmas belongs to us. But in reality, that first Christmas, the original Christmas story, that was for everyone too. And the Christmas story is a message for all people of all backgrounds and circumstances and stages of life. So in this 4-week series, we're going to look through the eyes of 4 very different people at that first Christmas, and we're going to rediscover that Christmas is for everyone. So let me start this Christmas season in this message talking about someone you might not associate with Christmas, but I do. His name is Frankenstein. Okay, I grew up watching old scary movies, including that Frankenstein movie starring Boris Karloff. Always stood out to me as really great old movie. Dr. Frankenstein creates this monster and it brings destruction. I knew the story, or so I thought. So one day I was in a bookstore, remember those? And I found a copy of the original story that the movie was based on. Here's the cover: Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus. I was like, wait, what? The modern Prometheus? I had to go do a little checking. Prometheus is a character in Greek mythology that defied the gods by creating fire. And I was like, I didn't know this was the whole title. And then the author, Mary Shelley, she was 19 years old when she wrote this book in 1818. Frankenstein is actually considered one of the first works of science fiction. So I was immediately like, maybe there's more to this story than I thought. And I was right. The story of Frankenstein starts in the ice-covered oceans of the Arctic North, and this scientist is hunting down a creature. Years prior, Victor Frankenstein lost his loved ones to a deadly virus. And he was so grief-stricken, he became obsessed with finding a way to prevent death so he'd never have to grieve again. By the way, I believe almost every great story written is really about grief. So Victor uses his scientific knowledge to reanimate a dead body, But that right after he does it, he feels this tremendous regret because he believes he's violated God's natural law. And he's horrified, so he kicks the creature out. And the creature, who's now alone in the world, goes into hiding. He ends up living under the porch of a Christian family where he learns English by listening to their family's spiritual readings. And he begins to identify with the character of Satan in the Bible, created by God, but then cast out of heaven. So, big picture, Frankenstein is the story about a creature wrestling with love and identity, and a scientist wrestling with grief and regret. And it's this grand, global cautionary tale about the lengths we will go to deal with our pain. So what does this have to do with Christmas, right? Well, I had a basic understanding of Frankenstein based on things I had heard and other people's retellings of the story. But when I read it for myself, it made me think about my own life and the world around me in these new and profound ways. And I had the same experience with the Christmas story. I didn't grow up like religious or spiritual. I heard snippets and readings of the Christmas story, mostly abbreviated and edited versions with all kinds of traditions attached to it. Interestingly, the most accurate memory of the Christmas story I have is from the animated Peanuts special that was on TV. I don't know if you have seen that or remember it. They actually just read the Bible directly. But one Christmas, I decided to read the story for myself. And I was like, this is so much more interesting than I ever imagined. And it made me think about my own life and the world around me in these really new and profound ways. Maybe you've heard the Christmas story more from other people's tellings than actually reading it yourself firsthand. Or maybe the Christmas story you know is more a collection of traditions than the actual event as it took place. And there's some of you joining us that maybe see the Christmas story as a legend or maybe a sentimental tale and wonder what elements are actually true. Well, here's the main idea for our message today. At Christmas, God gives us a true story to be shared. Let's take a look at the Christmas story through the eyes of one of the people who wrote about it and preserved the story of Jesus' birth that we have today. And here's where you can find it in the Bible. Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. So it's in the New Testament. And if you have a Bible, I'd like you to go there yourself. If you don't have a Bible, I'm going to show you what we're reading on the screen. But let's take a look at this, and we're going to discover some important things about the Christmas story. Here's what Luke writes. Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They use the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theophilus, so that you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. So that's how it starts. Just recently, a friend of mine from out of state was watching one of the SpaceX launches, you know, the new Dragon spacecraft. Super awesome. And after watching it, he was remembering that the old space shuttle program was shelved, and he gave me a call. He said, do you remember when they retired the space shuttle and they actually drove it through the streets of LA? He said, I heard that the space shuttle was so wide that they had to lay down the street lights to get it through. And he said, you were there. Is that really what happened? And I was like, totally. In fact, I have a picture of it. Here's me and my kids. There's the space shuttle in the back, right? And then look at this next picture. There's my son's foot on one of the downed street lights. And I said, what else do you want to know? And we had this great conversation. He was asking all these questions. Some of you were there when this happened too, so you were eyewitnesses of it. What my friend was doing with the shuttle story was kind of like what Luke was doing with the Christmas story. Luke was sorting through all the written and the verbal accounts about Jesus. And what's cool is he could go straight to the source, Jesus's disciples. Luke could just talk to Peter or John or Mary Magdalene. As he was researching the birth of Jesus, he could just go talk to Mary, the mother of Jesus, and say, can you verify this stuff for me, please? Tell me what happened and how it went down, because I want to be accurate here. So here's the first thing we discover about the Christmas story. The birth of Jesus is rooted in history. You know, my spiritual story with God started with a lot of skepticism. For a lot of years, I thought Christianity was just something made up by a couple of guys sitting in a room trying to modernize Greek myths. I had heard people talk about Jesus. I knew the basics of the Christmas story, but I had never actually read this 2,000-year-old historical document for myself. And when I did, something clicked. I was reading, I was like, this is written as history. This isn't Narnia or Westeros. This is ancient Palestine. There's dates and names of real people. These things can be verified. And unlike other history, which is often written by the winners, the people described here are outcasts and they're slaves. They're everyday people. They're actually writing a story that the people in authority and power wanted to suppress. Of course, I still had to decide whether or not I was going to believe it. But I realized this wasn't a legend. This is stuff people wrote that had happened. And this guy, Luke, did his research. And before we go further, what do we know about this guy, Luke? Well, here's a few facts that we know. One, he was a Greek physician living in the first century. He was from ancient Syria. Tradition tells us he was a single man with no children. And in addition to researching and writing the history of Jesus, he wrote part one, which is what we're reading part of. And then he also wrote a great sequel. Part two, it's in the New Testament, it's called The Acts of the Apostles, and it's kind of like the greatest hits of the first 30 years of Christianity. And it's based on his firsthand experience. He traveled all around the ancient Near East with one of Christianity's first missionaries, Paul. And so he actually uses the word we when he's writing because he was physically present for some of the events in that book. So if you haven't read Luke and then Acts, it's a great part one and part two. And I think what I like most about Luke's writing, especially the Christmas story, is that he's doing his best to explain things if you're not very religious. Because a lot of Jesus's ministry was to Jewish people, and Christianity started from within Judaism, but Luke wasn't Jewish. So he wanted to write something that would be very understandable to the millions of people that were not of that culture. So the birth of Jesus is rooted in history. Now, why is that important? Well, God's not just an idea for people who want to escape the realities of life. God works in and through history in the real world where we live. When we read about how God has worked in the real world in the past, we're reminded that God works in the real world of today. When we read the history of God's involvement with other people, it reminds us of God's involvement with us. God has been with you through the history of your life. And whether you realize it or not, God has been present with you through your ups and downs and has been helping shape your life so that you can grow closer to Him. So here's an action step I have for you. I'd like you to read through Luke chapters 1 through 4, not just verses 1 through 4, the ones we're looking at today, but the 4 chapters that describe the Christmas story. And if you don't have a physical Bible, you can go here. You can go to BibleGateway.com and you can read it there. There's actually a different translations out there that you can read from. I use a version called the New Living Translation because it's written in really understandable modern day language, but it's true to how the author really wrote it. And if possible, when you read Luke 1 through 4, read it out loud. Because we believe most of the Bible was written to be read out loud because most people either couldn't read or didn't have personal copies like we do. So when you read it out loud, you're really experiencing it the way the author intended you to experience. And take your time with it. Enjoy what you're reading. Make notes of questions that come up. Make notes of cool things that you didn't know. Now, why am I asking you to do this? Because this is what Luke was doing. Something that I learned a few weeks ago was this word, pedagogy. The word means how a person teaches. Those of you that are teachers, you know this. It describes how a person communicates information. And people teach in different ways, right? So Jesus taught by telling stories and asking questions and having dialogue. Luke's pedagogy is what we would call self-learning, right? So he says, I've done my research, I've prepared something for you, now go and read it and learn and grow. So this is kind of what we do at Journey of Faith. Like we'll start you off and give you some guidance, and then you have to go read it and learn it and apply it. Some of you might only experience the Bible through sermons or someone else writing about it or someone else's Bible studies. And that's a great first step. But Luke is saying, don't depend on your pastor to teach you the Bible and to read the Bible for you. Do it yourself. Don't settle for a summary or an edited version told through traditions. Read it on your own. So if you've read it before or you've never opened a Bible in your life, would you read Luke chapters 1 through 4 on your own? Do some self-learning. And if you'd like some help with this, our life groups are a great place to get some help in getting into the Bible. Christmas is about God's gift to us. God gives us a true story to be shared. The birth of Jesus is rooted in history. And let's look for one more insight about the Christmas story from Luke's introduction. Here's what he says. I also have decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theophilus, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. He's writing this to someone named Theophilus. When I first read this, I was like, who's this Theo guy? Who is this guy? So I looked up the name Theophilus. It's actually a Greek name, and it means friend of God or loved by God. And some people believe this is just a generic title for anyone reading what Luke has written. You know, like you are loved by God. So read this because it's written for you. You are Theophilus, right? That's pretty cool. Other people, including myself, believe that Theo was a real guy. I mean, when we look at what it says, I've decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theophilus, so you can be certain of the truth that you were taught. It sounds like he's talking to a real person, right? And this phrase, most honorable, I looked it up, and that was a phrase that was often given to high-ranking Roman officials. So Luke was probably writing to someone who had heard the Christmas story, but was not sure if it was true. And so Luke carefully researches it. He verifies the facts in order to be accurate. Why? So he could share it with others. And that's the second thing that we can learn here from Luke's introduction. God gives us opportunities to share the Christmas story with others. Learning about Jesus and growing in our relationship with God through reading the Bible is really great, but it's not meant to stop there. God wants us to share his story with others, like Luke was doing with Theophilus. So I just encourage you to read Luke chapter 1 through 4 on your own for yourself. Here's one more important action step. Look for opportunities to share what you're reading in a relevant way. What would this look like for you? Maybe someone asks about your holiday traditions, and you can mention that you're reading the Christmas story firsthand, and you can share something interesting that you learned while you were reading it. You could say, hey, I've been reading the actual Christmas story in the Bible, and I'm kind of surprised how different it is from what I've heard. Or you could say, I just read part of the Christmas story, and I didn't realize it reads like history, not like a legend or a fable. I think you might find actually some really cool, relevant connections as well. You might be surprised you're in the middle of a conversation with somebody and a subject comes up, and you might be able to say, hey, it's interesting. That reminds me of something I just read about in the original Christmas story. God creates those opportunities when we're looking for them. You could also invite an unchurched neighbor to read it with you, not with any agenda, not to try to convert, but just to read it firsthand. You could say, hey, our pastor encourages us to ask someone who's never read the Christmas story to read it firsthand and give us their thoughts and reactions. Would you be open to that? I'd love to hear what your take is on it when you read it. There's something really powerful when you just read the Bible and ask questions. I've been speaking with a lot of our ministry partners around the world. One of the most influential methods of sharing faith with people that's really bringing people to Jesus is what's called the discovery method. You invite a non-Christian to read the Bible with you, ask them what stands out to them, encourage their questions, and you just allow God to work with them directly through their curiosity. It's relational, it's authentic, it's really empowering, especially to people like me. When I first started reading the Bible, I had so much skepticism, and I didn't want to be pressured into believing anything. An important way we can share the faith with people is just inviting them to discover and immerse themselves in the story of Jesus. For those of you, by the way, for those of you who love apologetics, this is called narrative apologetics. We think this is what Luke was doing with Theophilus. Luke's saying, I know you're a very intelligent person, and I know that you've heard about the Jesus story, and I want to invite you to just read this, and then let's talk, and you can decide for yourself. What if your curiosity and discovery of reading the original Christmas story could capture and inspire the imagination of others around you to read it for themselves or with you? At Christmas, God gives us a true story to be shared. The birth of Jesus is rooted in history, and God opens opportunities to share the Jesus story with others. Look for those opportunities with the people you know. And if you've never read it before, or you've read it 100 times, this Christmas, open up this true story and explore it and be inspired by it. And we're going to keep talking about it over the next several weeks. Remember in the beginning, I told you how surprised and curious I was when I opened up the first few pages of Mary Shelley's Gothic sci-fi novel. The same thing happened when I read the Christmas story for myself. I was pulled in by the unusual way that it started. So it doesn't start with a manger on a quiet night with Mary and Joseph. It starts in the darkened, smoke-filled room of the Jewish temple. Zechariah is an aging, childless priest who stands alone burning incense as part of his job. He's one of 18,000 priests who are assigned to work in the temple, which means this might be the only time in his life he would be standing in this holy place. And he's sad. He's sad because he and his wife, they can't have children. And as he quietly goes about his duties, the dimly candlelit room suddenly brightens, and he's face to face with this shining apparition, and he's scared to death. And the apparition speaks and gives him this confusing and unbelievable message that's going to change his life and his family's life and the future of the whole world. True story. Go read it for yourself. And look for an opportunity to share what you're reading with an unchurched friend. Gracious God, thank you for giving us a true story to be shared. Thank you that you've been working throughout history, and that reminds us that you're working in our lives, in the real world. And as we dive into this Christmas season, help us to read the Christmas story fresh for ourselves. And thank you for the opportunities you're going to give us to share that story with others. Thank you for the gift of Jesus coming into this world. We are inspired and curious and in awe, and we're grateful. In Jesus' name, amen.